To quote the Jamaican musician and activist Muda Baruka, slavery is not our history. Slavery interrupted our history. With that being said, roughly 6,000 years ago, the seat of academic excellence resided on the African continent in the schooling system created in then called Kemet, now called Egypt, thousands of years before the Greeks, Plato, and his university system. 1440 to 1442 ushers in the European global domination as the Portuguese exploit African kindness to spread their version of civilization. From 1440 to 1865, nearly an unrecorded 100 million people's lives are lost or scattered from their homes of origins to do the bidding of the colonizers. According to Herbert Apdeker, in 1526 was the actual first landing of stolen Africans on U.S. soil in South Carolina by the Spanish, but they rebelled, joined the so-called Indians, and became Maroons. 1619, the first official group of enslaved Africans reached Jamestown, Virginia via the British. 1865, the legal abolishment of chattel slavery happens in the United States. Shortly thereafter, mainly in the South, an estimated 500 freedom schools, underground stolen African places of learning, be it by a tree or in actual buildings, are created, again to show the premium stolen Africans placed on education. 1870, the Preparatory High School for colored youth, now called Dunbar High School, was formed. 1890, June 4th, 5th, and 6th, the first Mohawk Conference on the Negro question was convened with the primary question of if to, and if so, how to educate these now free stolen Africans. As quoted by attendee, the former President Rutherford B. Hayes said, "We're responsible for their presence and condition on this continent, having deprived them of their labor, liberty, and manhood, and us having grown rich and strong while doing it, we have no excuse for neglecting them if our selfishness prompted us to do so." I share this quick history to highlight the premium stolen Africans placed on education before enslavement and afterwards, as well as a bit of the struggles we face to get quality education in the face of insurmountable odds. To ensure a high quality of education that reflected us. In the book, you will read the names of great race men and women of their time, like Carter G. Woodson and Anna Julia Cooper, as well as other prominent figures of stolen African history to come through the hallowed halls of Dunbar High. Written with an intimate knowledge of the material, both of her parents went to Dunbar. Written from firsthand accounts by gathering a lot of oral history as well as copiously documented research. And most importantly, written in narrative format where the peoples, struggles, and triumphs of this historic institution flows easily off the page and directly into the reader's hearts. I'll even go out on a limb and declare that Mrs. Alison Stewart has done the alumni and her parents proud with the telling of this important story. Mrs. Alison Stewart first caught my attention as VJ on MTV, and the alphabets in her career continued. She was on ABC, World News Tonight, albeit 12 to 6 in the morning. Then CBS, then MSNBC from 3 to 3:30 in the morning. She must be a night owl like myself, I guess. Then on radio at NPR, PBS, and now she's right here at the most important initials, P&P. I now bring to the podium the former VJ, the news journalist, the wife, the mother, the could-have-been model, and now author, Alison Stewart, in her book, First Class, The Legacy of Dunbar, America's First Black Public High School.
Push this down a little bit. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming out tonight. And thank you for that lovely introduction. Wow. I'm going to introduce myself to folks who may be encountering me for the first time. My name is Alison Stewart, And my mom was in the Dunbar class of 1947, and my dad was in the Dunbar class of 1946, and my grandfather was in the M Street class of 1915. So now, if you're from DC, you've probably heard about Dunbar from a mom or a dad or an uncle or an auntie. And if you're not from DC, the story might be unfamiliar to you. So I do want to introduce it a little bit to folks who maybe are thinking, why is everybody talking about this high school and what's so important about it? The story goes something like this. Dunbar High School was a place where highly educated and engaged teachers who had the highest expectations for their students. And as a result, they produced scholars who then went on to college. In the 1950s, 80% of Dunbar High School graduates went to college. And as a result, they excelled in a wide range of fields, from business to education to the sciences and the arts. Now, I could be talking about Andover or Exeter or any of these schools. But one of the reasons Dunbar was so spectacular, and the story itself is so spectacular, is because Dunbar was a segregated high school in the nation's capital. And it produced some of the greatest African Americans and some of the greatest Americans, period. So many firsts came from Dunbar High School. I always feel like I have to wind up because the list is so long. I have to stretch out before I say the whole list, but I'll give a few. The first black graduate of the Naval Academy was a Dunbar graduate. The first black Army general was a Dunbar graduate. The first black federal judge, a Dunbar graduate. The first black presidential cabinet member, a Dunbar graduate. You see where I'm going with this. In the arts, Billy Taylor, Dr. Billy Taylor, the jazz musician. Elizabeth Catlett, the fine artist in the Museum of Modern Art. And even, I won't say even more important, but as important as all of these bold-faced names were the hundreds of teachers who came out of Dunbar, who then fanned out into DC and into the South and into the colored school systems with this fantastic basis of an education. And how many people have Dunbar graduates who are parents or aunties? Okay, so you'll relate to this story. I was looking for people to interview for the book, and I wanted to just talk to some people who had parents or aunties, and I realized Valerie Jarrett's father went to Dunbar. So it took me a year, but I got to the White House. And this is one of the stories she told me. I don't want to tell all of them because they're pretty funny, but this sort of sums it up for people about the first time she heard about Dunbar from her father. She said, "I was a very young child. Dunbar was critical in my father's path and his path in life. He gives it full credit for having been educated, he together with his colleagues, at a world-class level. Anytime I would ever say anything that was grammatically incorrect, he would say, 'As Dunbar High School taught me,' and then he would correct me. And he's a big believer in don't be lazy with your grammar. Do not be lazy, period. Certainly do not be lazy in how you speak." And I think that, as a young child, I remember him telling me stories about Dunbar High School, and really to this day, just gives it an enormous amount of credit for the shaping of his life. One of the great benefits of working on this book and writing this book, the reason I wanted to write this book initially was I would hear all these stories from my parents and from my uncle and cousins who all went to Dunbar, and I thought it was such an incredible story. I was sort of fascinated with the idea that you had incredibly educated African Americans still living in a segregated city, that you could speak French fluently, but some person in a store wouldn't let you come in and buy a coat. I just thought that was such a bizarre contradiction. And one of the great benefits I thought, was I could actually talk to people who had experienced this firsthand. But I realized I was in a bit of a race against time, because the people who could bear witness to what happened at Dunbar were all in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I've told the story before, if you've heard it. If not, it's kind of funny. I started writing, I got very excited about the whole project. I decided in 2006 I was just going to do it. So I started writing letters, query letters, to get interviews. And I really didn't have myself together just yet. So I sent out a few, and I got one back corrected from a Dunbar graduate. So that was the clue about what I was doing. I was very lucky to have that happen early. But I was also very happy that I sent one out, and I came back. I was working at MSNBC at the time, and I came back and I checked my voicemail, and it was Senator Ed Brooke saying, I would be happy to talk to you about Dunbar. It was one of my most important experiences in my life.